Welcome back to Secure Freedom Radio, and we have the pleasure this segment of talking with Roger Noriega, who was former Assistant Secretary of State for the Western Hemisphere under President George W. Bush and is founder of the Inter-American Security Watch. Roger, there's a lot going on in our own neck of the woods. As much as we like to focus on the rest of the world, I think we fail to take a good look at the dangers right here. Now, there's some apparent talks of some sort underway between a senior State Department official and a narco trafficker in Venezuela. Can you give us a little insight as to what that might be about?
Right. On Saturday, Thomas Shannon, who's the counselor to the Secretary of State, Kerry, met with a man, Diosdado Cabello, who published reports say is the capo of a cocaine cartel that operating out of Venezuela. He's the president of the National Assembly, very important senior political leader. And inexplicably, he turned up in Haiti in a meeting with this senior U.S. diplomat. It seems like fairly brazen interference with an ongoing criminal investigation and a rather risky, if not, frankly, foolhardy move on the part of this U.S. diplomat. This administration will stop at nothing to find an accommodation with that anti-American criminal regime. And I hope Congress follows up vigorously to find out what's going on, because it looks like a debacle in the making.
I mean, they can't not know this is a bad guy. So they're obviously just willing to overlook that. And as you mentioned, do what's necessary to further their support for this regime. Let me ask you another thing that is going on is the Venezuelans are apparently selling their U.S. refinery due to the fact that their economy is dying, I guess, is close to the truth. How is that playing out?
Well, to understand what's happening in Venezuela today, you have to be a fan of Scorsese movies, because essentially this is a mafia kind of busting out a pizza joint, except it happens to be a country. It's a bankrupt country, no rule of law, so investment has sunken, food line scarcity, power outages, just a collapsing country. And they're selling off PDVSA assets piece by piece to make money, to pay bills or pay bonds that are owned by other corrupt officials in the government. So it is really just part of the whole death throes of that regime. And quite frankly, I don't know why we would want to prop it up with these kinds of cynical encounters with criminals. Quite frankly, we should be sanctioning these people, sending a message that the United States is going to hold people accountable for looting that country, for shoveling cocaine, not only into the United States, but through Central America and Mexico, sowing mayhem everywhere it goes. This is a regime that you can't appease. They've already done enough damage to this administration by coddling them for years. We've got to get very strong, stand with the real Democrats in that country, and insist on some accountability for the corruption and criminality. And we need to be a strong voice for that, and challenging other countries in Latin America to step up to the plate to confront that threat. And it's going to take a lot of work of the U.S. exposing this criminality, drawing red lines, and I mean real ones, not fake ones. And quite frankly, that worries me, because this administration seems incapable of doing that. I think President Obama, quite frankly, is looking to preserve his photo op in Havana, and if that means turning a blind eye or even for that matter, coddling the mess the Cubans have sown in Venezuela, he'll do it. It's just really shockingly cynical.
Well, okay, we're not doing much. We are being, I think it's fair to say, cynical and irresponsible. But the Chinese do not appear to be, or maybe they're being cynical and self-interested, but they are propping this regime up. They are providing liquidity and assets to them, it seems, in return for some of that liquid gold. Should that be worrying us that we're ceding that vital resource in our own hemisphere to the Chinese?
Absolutely. I mean, our imports of Venezuelan crude are cut in half in the last 10 years. That's why one of the reasons why they can sell that refinery. In the meantime, China's imports have gone up in the last 10 years from Venezuela from 40,000 barrels a day to somewhere north of 600,000 barrels a day. I warned about this shift years ago when the so-called experts said that this wasn't realistic, but it's happening. The Chinese, on the other hand, they put about $40 billion in that economy, and quite frankly, are wondering what they're going to get out of it because with that regime collapsing. So they're having their own misgivings. But the bottom line is they're trying to engage in a fire sale all over Latin America, buying up assets depleted by corruption. And they're playing the long haul game, and we're going to need to push back in a serious way before they start posing a security threat from that part of the world, not just an economic competition.
And the Chinese have been doing a lot of that worldwide. They've been buying up mineral rights and oil in Africa and all over Asia and any place they can get to those scarce resources that are necessary to run the modern world. Is it possible for them, even in the broken state of the Venezuelan regime, to make a legitimate investment? Are they devious enough to be potentially looking to prop up a regime that will continue to sell them what they want?
Well, I think they'd sell out the Nicolas Maduro's regime if they got reasonable assurances from the opposition that they would more or less honor some of their commitments by continuing to provide oil for the money that they've already given the Venezuelans. So they're a pretty cynical bunch, obviously. But frankly, I don't think they would be as bold in the region if we had, made it very clear that we wouldn't tolerate the kind of corrupt practices that the Chinese usually employ. Even in a sophisticated country like Brazil was learning a very tough lesson doing business with them. They pinned too much of their hopes on this commodity boom, and when the bottom dropped out their economy is now into a recession, and the economy will shrink 1.5% this year. And along with the corruption and Chinese swooping in and buying up bargains in Brazil, caused by China closing its market to some Brazilian companies. So it's pretty ruthless stuff. They're not a very charming lot. So I think that the chances of U.S. Business getting in there, if the competition is fair, is pretty good, because I think they would much rather do business with people that can be trusted, at least within reason.
Well, let's hope it turns out that way. Let's move a little closer to home, at least here in America, and talk about Mexico's military acquisitions from us. They seem to be getting an awful lot of serious military hardware. Are they going to make a major push against the drug gangs?
Well, this worries me a little bit now. It may sound ironic because I'm pretty adamant that you have to have a strong security component in dealing with these narcos. It can't just be done with midnight basketball and tattoo removal kits, and that's the kind of soft side that culture of lawfulness and all this nonsense. That's wonderful stuff, but it's not going to do very much when you have narcos throwing hand grenades at you, and that's literally what happens. But at the same time, when I see the substantial increases in military purchases in Mexico, frankly, I just see corruption. I see people probably shaving substantial sums off of these purchases, and military purchases is the hardest are easiest to hide money in because of the black budgets and because you have the so-called independence of the military. And you can't shoot your way out of this mess. Frankly, they have to do a better job with a comprehensive security strategy to deny the ability of these narcos to operate, to launder money, to engage in all of the different criminal activities they're engaged in. And yes, you have to confront the increasingly bold and violent narcos, but tanks and helicopters isn't what's called for when you're talking about urban the urban criminal challenge that they're facing.
Well, Roger, hopefully we can at least shine a light on those kind of shady activities. We've been talking with Roger Noriega, former Assistant Secretary of State for the Western Hemisphere and founder of the Inter-American Security Watch. Up next, we'll talk with Bill Gertz, Senior Editor of the Washington Free Beacon, about some of the interesting intel that is happening in and around the D.C. and our friends area.